I still remember the exact moment when I first realized that life sometimes hides its most painful lessons in the smallest questions. My name is Nova, and I'm 60 years old now, looking back on a life that seemed ordinary on the surface, but carried complexities I could never have imagined. One simple question before my marriage, the one I ignored, changed everything in ways I could never predict. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but it was the kind of question that, if answered honestly, might have saved me years of heartache. I want to share this story because maybe, just maybe, someone out there will recognize themselves in it and pause before making the same mistake. Before I go further, if you appreciate stories that reveal real life lessons, hit like and subscribe gently so you can follow along. I was 25 when I first met him. He seemed perfect, attentive, charming, and the kind of man everyone would assume was safe. My heart was full of hope and excitement, and my mind, though slightly cautious, dismissed the smallest doubts I felt. Have you ever been so eager for a dream to come true that you silence the tiny voice warning you to slow down? That was me. I laughed off my own hesitations and believed that love alone would guide us through anything. The question itself was simple. How do you see money and finances in a marriage? I remember it being a casual dinner, just the two of us, candles flickering, the kind of moment that feels safe. And I brushed it aside, laughing lightly and saying, "We'll figure it out together." Don't worry. I thought it was insignificant, a trivial detail in the grand fairy tale I imagined. But as the years have shown me, the things we ignore quietly have a way of growing louder, and they often come back with consequences we never anticipated. Our wedding day was magical. Friends, family, laughter, the scent of flowers filling the air. I can still see him standing across the room, the light catching his smile, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world paused just for us. But even in that perfect moment, the small, ignored question sat in the corner of my mind. I didn't want to think about it. I wanted everything to be beautiful, and I believed that joy could cover over any gaps in understanding. The first year of marriage was what most people would call blissful. We traveled, celebrated small victories, and laughed through arguments that seemed tiny at the time. But slowly, the cracks started to appear. The first time I noticed was a small, seemingly harmless incident, a credit card I didn't know about, a bank statement that didn't make sense. When I asked about it, the answers were vague, brushed over quickly, sometimes even tinged with irritation. And that little ignored question, the one I had laughed off, began to echo loudly in my mind. Have you ever realized, too late, that a small warning you ignored was actually a lifeline? That is what I faced. Sitting alone one evening, staring at the living room wall, I felt a sharp pang of regret. How could I have been so blind? I had thought love was enough, that our commitment would cover all misunderstandings. But I had overlooked the foundation: honesty, transparency, shared values, and without it, even love can struggle to survive. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust, about understanding the priorities and boundaries we both had, boundaries I had never asked about, assuming we were aligned. That assumption became the root of conflicts, quiet frustrations, and long nights of wondering if I had made the right choices. I had ignored a simple question, thinking it would never matter, and now I could see the ripple effect it had on our marriage, our communication, and my peace of mind. In that quiet reflection, I made an emotional confession to myself that I had never admitted to anyone before. I was scared. I was scared that love alone wouldn't be enough. I was scared that the person I had trusted most could not meet me on the same page about life's practicalities. And in that fear, I realized something crucial. It wasn't just about him or our decisions. It was about my own courage to ask, to face uncomfortable truths, and to trust my intuition. As the months went on, those small ignored details began to shape our life. Arguments about money grew longer, conversations about plans became tense, and the joy we had once celebrated felt like it was slipping through our fingers. Yet, there were moments of hope too, tiny reminders that connection was still possible if approached with honesty. I had to learn, painfully, that ignoring questions for comfort's sake only delays reality, and when reality arrives, it's louder than you ever expected. I remember one particular evening, sitting on the couch, my hands trembling slightly, asking again about something he had never fully explained before. This time, I demanded clarity, not out of confrontation, but out of necessity. And in that moment, a self-realization hit me. It's never too late to start asking questions, but it's always better to ask them before a foundation is laid. I understood why that small question mattered so much. It wasn't about money, it was about respect, partnership, and the shared understanding that supports love when life gets complicated. After that quiet evening of reflection, life didn't magically become easy. The small, ignored question had begun to shape not only our interactions but also how I saw myself. I started noticing patterns I had always overlooked, subtle shifts in tone, the way he avoided discussing long-term plans, and the little inconsistencies in what he said versus what actually happened. It was confusing, frustrating, and sometimes painfully lonely. Have you ever felt that growing distance inside a relationship, that slow drift that makes you question everything you thought you knew? That was my reality. One night, I found myself staring at an old photo album, memories of laughter and adventures from the early days of our courtship staring back at me. I realized that I had been holding on to a memory of him rather than the reality of who he had become. The woman in those photographs, smiling, carefree, believing in love without conditions, seemed almost like a stranger to me now. And that fear, the fear that I had ignored, gnawed at me had I built my life on a fantasy. I remember vividly the first argument that felt truly consequential. It wasn't about money, at least not on the surface. It was about trust, honesty, and the underlying assumptions that had gone unspoken for so long. Words were said that stung, tears were shed, and I felt a deep, aching realization that the simplicity I had hoped for in marriage didn't exist in reality. My heart sank as I wondered whether my own choice to ignore that small question had set the stage for all of this. Through those tense moments, I began an emotional confession to myself, one I couldn't share with anyone yet. I admitted that I had been afraid of discomfort, of conflict, and of asking questions that might shatter the ideal I had imagined. But in that self-reflection, something shifted. I recognized that courage wasn't just about taking bold steps in life. Sometimes it was about facing small, uncomfortable truths head-on. The very question I had dismissed before marriage became a mirror, reflecting my own need for honesty, clarity, and assertiveness. As days turned into weeks, the emotional weight of these realizations began to affect my everyday life. Small decisions became tense negotiations. Every conversation carried a weight I had never anticipated. I remember walking through the grocery store, holding my shopping list, and thinking, how did I get here? I was a woman who had believed she was prepared for life, yet I was constantly navigating consequences of choices I had never fully questioned. And yet, amidst the tension, there were moments of clarity. One morning, I woke up early, sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sunrise, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a sense of calm. I realized that life's challenges often teach lessons not through ease but through discomfort. That tiny question I had ignored wasn't a punishment, it was an opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to grow, and to understand the true value of communication, honesty, and mutual respect. I began asking myself questions I should have asked years ago. What do I truly need in a partnership? What lines are non-negotiable for me? How do I protect my own integrity while loving another? These reflections weren't easy. They were messy, uncomfortable, and sometimes deeply painful. But they were necessary. And in those moments of self-realization, I started to see hope. The hope that even delayed understanding can still transform life if approached with honesty and courage. We started attending counseling, cautiously, skeptically at first. It was hard to face our past mistakes, the miscommunications, and the subtle resentments that had built up silently. But every session became a mirror, revealing not only his patterns but my own. how I had avoided difficult conversations, how I had prioritized comfort over clarity, and how ignoring a single, simple question had ripple effects far beyond what I could have imagined. Have you ever felt regret so sharp it wakes you in the middle of the night? That was me. And yet, even in that regret, I found a lesson: life doesn't punish for mistakes, it teaches for growth. And sometimes, the questions we fear most to ask are exactly the ones that protect us in the long run. Through these months of reflection and dialogue, I also started noticing subtle changes in myself. I became more attentive, more assertive, more willing to bring difficult topics to the table early, rather than letting them fester. I realized that while I couldn't go back in time, I could shape the future. And in doing so, I discovered a new dimension of love, one grounded in mutual understanding, shared values, and courage. In sharing this with you on our channel, I hope it resonates. Life has a way of teaching us lessons in unexpected ways, and sometimes it's the smallest, seemingly insignificant questions that hold the most power. Maybe someone watching this right now has a similar question lingering, one they've been too afraid to ask. I want to encourage you: don't wait. Don't ignore it. The answers might change your life in ways you never imagined, but in ways that matter. The days following our first deep, honest confrontation felt like walking a tightrope. Every word, every glance carried weight, and I was acutely aware of how much had been left unspoken for decades. The question I had ignored before marriage, the one that seemed so small and trivial at the time, was now shaping the very core of my relationship. It wasn't about blame anymore, it was about understanding, healing, and finding a path forward. But the road was anything but smooth. There were moments when I wanted to retreat, to go back to the comfort of ignorance, to pretend that everything was fine. Have you ever felt that temptation, the wish to close your eyes and ignore reality, even when you know deep down it's dangerous? That was me, Nova, sitting quietly on the couch, feeling the weight of years of unasked questions pressing down on me. But then I remembered something fundamental: courage doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. And those whispers urged me to keep pushing, to keep asking, to keep facing the truths I had long avoided. During one particularly tense evening, a seemingly small disagreement erupted into a discussion that laid bare years of unacknowledged issues. I realized that our communication had been layered with assumptions, silences, and avoidance. Every time I had chosen convenience over confrontation, every time I had ignored a subtle red flag, I had allowed cracks to form in the foundation of our marriage. And yet, it wasn't just him, it was both of us. We had been coexisting, but not truly connecting. In a quiet moment later that night, I sat alone with my thoughts and had an emotional confession. I wish I had asked that one question before marriage. I wish I had known, truly known, what I was stepping into. The weight of regret was palpable, yet intertwined with a glimmer of hope, because acknowledging a mistake is the first step toward growth, and understanding its impact is the path to transformation. As days turned into weeks, we started rebuilding, slowly, deliberately. We revisited every corner of our past, every decision, every unspoken expectation. I asked the questions I had avoided for years. What do you truly value? How do you envision our future? What are your non-negotiables? And slowly, carefully, he began to answer, not defensively, not with evasion, but with a honesty that had been absent for decades. Through this process, I noticed something profound about myself. I realized that I had grown accustomed to bending, to compromising, and to avoiding confrontation for the sake of peace. But peace without honesty is fragile, it is temporary. And the courage to face difficult truths, the courage to ask the questions that might hurt, was, in fact, the truest form of love. Have you ever had a moment when you see yourself clearly, flaws and all, and it terrifies you? That moment came for me in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of tea, and realizing that life had given me a rare gift, a chance to rewrite patterns that had been repeating for decades. But the gift came with responsibility. We began setting boundaries, learning each other's limits, and actively listening, not just hearing words, but understanding the emotions behind them. The difference was astonishing. The small question I had ignored became a symbol of accountability, honesty, and personal growth. It was a reminder that sometimes the questions we fear to ask hold the answers we desperately need. And yet, the journey was far from over. There were still moments of doubt, days when old habits crept back in, and times when I questioned whether change was truly possible. But every time those doubts arose, I reminded myself transformation is not instantaneous. It is gradual, layered, and often uncomfortable. And discomfort, I realized, is a teacher in disguise. Through this emotional reset, I began noticing subtle joys, shared laughter, genuine conversations, and the small victories of alignment and mutual respect. I realized that ignoring a question once might have caused pain, but confronting it now could foster growth, resilience, and a renewed connection. In sharing this story on our channel, I hope you see that life's lessons often arrive disguised as mistakes. The question I ignored was not the end of my story, it was the catalyst that forced me to look inward, to confront uncomfortable truths, and to actively participate in the shaping of my own life. Perhaps someone watching this has a question lingering, one that could change their life if asked, one that could prevent years of regret. So, I ask you, are you willing to face your own truths, even if they seem frightening or inconvenient? Are you ready to ask the questions that matter, even when they could disrupt the comfort of your current reality? Because sometimes, the courage to ask, not the answers themselves, is what transforms everything. And as we continue, I want to remind you to like and subscribe if this story resonates. Because sharing experiences like mine can help others avoid mistakes and embrace growth. Comment below if you've ever had a question you ignored, and let's reflect on what could happen if we confront it together. Life has a way of teaching us lessons through both joy and pain, and sometimes the questions we fear to ask hold the most profound insights. By the time we reached this stage, I had begun to understand something fundamental. Life is rarely about the mistakes themselves, it's about how we respond to them. That one question I had ignored before marriage had cast a long shadow over years of my life, but it also created the opportunity for profound clarity. Sitting in our living room one quiet evening, I felt a wave of realization wash over me. Sometimes, it takes decades to uncover a simple truth, and yet that truth has the power to reshape everything. I remember looking at him, really looking, as if seeing him for the first time. The man I had married decades ago was still there, but so was a version of him we hadn't allowed to fully emerge. And in that moment, I understood that the question I had feared wasn't about judgment, or rejection, or what-ifs. It was about awareness, honesty, and shared responsibility. It was about the courage to know and be known. Have you ever experienced a moment when years of avoidance finally unravel, and suddenly the truth feels both terrifying and liberating? That was me. Nova, heart-pounding, realizing that life doesn't wait for us to feel ready. It demands our presence, our honesty, our willingness to confront what we might have avoided for convenience or fear. And once you step into that, there is a strange kind of freedom, messy, painful, yet transformative. We started making small but intentional changes. Conversations that once felt loaded with tension became spaces of genuine connection. I asked questions I had once been afraid to voice, and he answered not defensively, but vulnerably, opening doors we had long kept closed. The emotional confession of years past, my regret for ignoring that single pivotal question, became a bridge, not a barrier. In the middle of one of these conversations, I had another realization. It wasn't just about him or me individually. It was about the system of expectations, assumptions, and silence that we had built together unknowingly. And acknowledging it didn't weaken us, it strengthened us. Because honesty, even delayed, always carries the potential to heal. Have you ever noticed how a single moment, a single decision, can ripple through years of your life? That question I had ignored was like a stone thrown into a pond, its effects spreading far and wide, touching corners of our marriage, our communication, and even our understanding of ourselves. And yet, the ripple could also bring new patterns, new insights, and a deeper connection than we had ever known. I realized that sharing this story on our channel wasn't just about recounting a personal journey. It was about creating a space where viewers could reflect on their own lives. Perhaps someone watching is hesitating to ask a crucial question, fearing conflict or discomfort. Maybe someone has ignored a warning sign or avoided a conversation that could alter the trajectory of their future. If my story can inspire even one person to confront the truth, even a truth they had once been too afraid to face, then every moment of reflection, every wave of regret, and every tear shed is worth it. Through this emotional reset, I also discovered self-compassion. It's easy to blame yourself for the mistakes of the past, to dwell on what could have been different. But growth requires turning that energy inward not as judgment, but as curiosity and care. I asked myself, what have I learned? How can I act differently now? How can I make choices that reflect awareness rather than avoidance? And those questions guided me toward a sense of empowerment I hadn't known I possessed. By the end of our journey, the question I had once feared became a symbol, a reminder that life's lessons, however delayed, are always available. The courage to ask, to listen, and to engage honestly with ourselves and others is a transformative act. And that's what I hope viewers take away. It's never too late to confront the questions that matter, to seek clarity, and to embrace the growth that comes from facing reality head on. As Nova, sharing this story now, I want to leave you with something to ponder. What is the one question you've been avoiding? The one truth you've been afraid to uncover? Are you ready to ask it, to confront it, and to let it guide you toward a more authentic, conscious life? If this story resonates with you, consider commenting below about the questions you've been hesitant to ask, or sharing this video with someone who might benefit from it. Life is a series of choices, and sometimes the smallest, seemingly insignificant questions carry the greatest power. And remember, even a delayed awakening can still lead to transformation, connection, and hope. Because in the end, the question we ignore today could very well become the key to the life we've been searching for. And as you reflect on your own journey, I hope you recognize that courage, awareness, and honesty, even decades later, can still change everything.